The purpose of today's session is because lots of you either have or will be asked to discount your bid levy, primarily by businesses in the retail, leisure and hospitality sector. And most of them asking for it at this stage across bids are clearly national multiple retailers, mainly retailers, who actually are operating in more than one of our bids. So they may not be asking the same question of every bid, but their strategy here is consistent across their bid portfolio. So we will be receiving similar letters. Right, so here is a cut and paste of one bid that received a letter from a retailer. And the one thing to bear in mind here is that clearly the retailers that are asking for this, and I will give their side of the story and the reasons why they're asking for it. There is a rationale for it, for sure, but they are acting together. It's not necessarily a cabal, but the same arguments are coming across. And the arguments are, we were closed or restricted on trading for a period of 3 months. For your bid, that is a quarter of your year, okay? So to recognise our loss of trade and revenue, and also your own activities during that 3 months, so that's the crucial bit, hold on to that thought, then we refer you to Romford bid. So Romford bid have given us a 25% reduction, which has reflected their own reduction in cost because they didn't continue with street patrols or high street displays, etc., etc., etc. So Romford bid discounted its cost in a 3-month period. That 3 months is 25% of the year's levy. So our rationale here is that you follow Romford and you also give us a 25% reduction, and we have precedent for that. And we're drawing on that precedent as our evidence to suggest that you should also give us that 25%. Now, that is the request, and let's just sort of follow on from that. This is what British Bids drafted, and the Bid Foundation and ATCM also signed up to this. So the industry bodies, as one, if you read through the long letter that is available for download on the British Bids website, you can download this letter and send it off to the levy payers. This is what they say. There is no argument for waiving or reducing bid levies at this time, and our discussions with bids across the country confirms this. So the industry bodies are clear. There is no precedent created by Romford or any other that means that all bids should concede to or agree to necessarily either waiving or reducing bid levies. So what is the landscape, though, that gives the retailers the justification to ask for either a discount or waiving of levy in entirety? Well, obviously, it is COVID-19. Nobody could argue that their trade in the leisure, hospitality and leisure sector, retail, leisure and hospitality sector, nobody could argue that those businesses, the majority of them, were adversely affected. There are some that traded throughout the so-called lockdown period, and there are some, we all know, that actually did incredibly well during that lockdown period. So it is not necessarily true to say that those asking for discounts were completely adversely affected for the 3 months. But as a sector, we know that is the sector that was most affected and has been most affected and arguably continually is most affected. Their further justification is that the government, at the very start of the COVID outbreak, stood down on business rates demand from that sector for the full 12-month period. So your bid levy is anchored on business rates. It's anchored on a rateable value. They have been released from obligations on business rates, and therefore there is some justification to say that since it is the same mechanism that triggers your levy, why should they not also receive some allowance on your bid levy? The reality is, although I'm sure it's not necessarily true of anybody in this call, we do know as an industry that not all bids operated 100% during that lockdown period. So if what the levy payers are saying is true about Romford, Romford did reduce its cost during that 3 months. Wouldn't have necessarily reduced it by 25% because it would still have significant overhead. But if indeed it were to have hibernated, use that as an expression, I'm not sure it's true of Romford, but if it were to have effectively hibernated for 3 months, it is fair comment that in the 12-month period, it would not necessarily expend the same amount of money. The further point is, we do know that some bids have already given the relief, and it isn't just Romford. Romford is the one being named because it's given it to all of its levy payers, but also bids like Heart of London have made their own decisions, and so there is some precedent in the industry here that goes beyond just the Romford example. There are others that are actively seeking some accommodation of bid levy or have sought some accommodation of bid levy with their levy payers. The rationale for that might be that, like Romford, they hadn't fully delivered during the 3 months. The rationale may also be they need to make a gesture to their levy payers at a difficult time. The rationale may also be a bit more about financial control, which is the speculation that if we give some money off, we will get paid more quickly. I'm not sure that is true, if I'm completely honest. But nonetheless, if I give you a 75% bill, you will pay me, won't you? Whereas if I continue to ask you for 100%, you may make my life difficult, take me through a court, and in the end, I'll get it, but I'll get it a lot further down the line, and I need the cash in now. So there is some financial rationale there. It then picks up on the next point, which is, and this is where each bid is entirely different. What is the financial reserve your organisation has if you were to even consider a reduction? Because although you may give a reduction to one levy payer, and I will give you the regulatory explanation in a second as to why I don't believe you can do that, but let's just say you did, you know that others will hear about it and you'll have to give more. So if you do not have significant financial reserves to protect yourself against that, you can't start down that path, because in the end you will run out of road. You won't have enough cash left, because it doesn't necessarily mean if you give discounts, people will pay you more quickly. So you have got to have financial reserves to dig into. And I think with the two examples I've mentioned so far, and I'm not commenting on these two bids from a negative perspective, Heart of London, Romford, and perhaps some others probably did have enough reserves sitting there that they could draw upon to now make up the discount that they were giving. The further argument, if I was the retailer that I might ask, is that you have already received the resilience funding, or the equivalent if you're in other areas of the UK. You have already received some government money to cover you for 3 months of overheads. The calculation on the resilience fund was, it was supposed to give you cash flow protection for 3 months, the 3 months being primarily April, June and July, although COVID set about itself in March. Resilience Fund didn't come in until later, because we negotiated with government, but it took some time. So the rationale is you have had some free grant money that you didn't budget for, that's come in to protect you from a cash flow perspective for this 3 months. So we're back at this 3 months, 25% thing, and there is further rationale for it there. And then the other thing is, it will depend on when your financial year is. So everybody in this call is not being affected in the same way. Some bids who might have a year end of, let's say, August 31st, actually by March had got in most or all of their levy. Therefore, the discount is being asked for next year, and for others, it's being asked for in the current or the previous year. So where you are in that financial flow is going to affect the impact of this on you. I would argue that if your year end is yet to start and starts in the next 3 months, you will be more affected by this than if you were to make the decision with a previous year end. The reason for that is clearly there will be greater business failure in the next 3 months than perhaps we've seen thus far, with all the government assistance and the furloughing assistance. So there are some considerations, but there is, to be honest, some rationale for the request. But then you come back to the regulations, and this is what the regulations say. What they say is, you cannot alter your bid arrangement. So your starting point, even if you were thinking about giving a discount, is what do your own arrangements say? Okay, what did your bid proposal and your business plan say with respect to levy over a period of time? Because what this clause clearly says is that you can make some alterations, but only if you have your own local variation or alteration provision. So if you don't have your own local alteration or variation provision, then actually, in essence, what the regulation says, you can't change anything at all. and therefore you couldn't make the reduction even if you wanted to. Now, if you do have a local alteration or variation provision, then there are only two things that you couldn't even then alter without what's called an alteration ballot. The first is the area of your bid. Well, nobody's asking you to do that. But the second does deal with levy, and this is what it says. So you would not be able, even if you had a local variation provision, to make an alteration to the bid levy in such a way that would, one, cause any person to be liable to pay a bid levy not previously liable. Well, nobody's asking you to do that, so we can't draw on that. But the second is the crucial one. Increase the bid levy for any person. So what Romford have done is discounted everybody by 25%. So everybody gets the same discount, pays the same 75%, and therefore nobody is worse off. However, what I would say, and it's not been tested in the court of law, but I think it would probably fall in the bid's favour, is that if you were to give a discretionary discount to one of your levy payers, let's use Primark as an example, then the net effect is that everybody else is paying more. So you have arguably increased the levy payable for most compared to the one that you've discounted. So what I would conclude from this is the idea of giving everybody a discount, if you really wanted to, cash flow reserves permitting, and the fact that actually you probably won't get the money in any more quickly, but all of that taken into account, you could do, but individual reductions, I don't think you could. And then the second thing is, depending on when your financial year is, if you were to give a reduction today, let's say to Primark, then clearly you've got to go back and talk to everybody else that may have paid the full amount and actually want to pay the full amount. So the likelihood is that somebody in that batch could actually challenge your decision by saying, I have ended up paying more, and therefore you breach clause 16, and I don't want you to reduce the levy because I believe in the bid and I want to pay the full amount. So I think that would be highly questionable. So that's the physical regulation. And then if you move on, and I've referred here to DCLG because it was DCLG when they released the guidance, they gave an explanation of regulation 16 that in truth doesn't tell you anything that the other clause does, but it just does it in plainer language. So this is the regulation, together with your own bid arrangements, you would need to be satisfied on if you were to even consider giving any form of discount, which we are not suggesting that you do, by the way. So here are the things that you will need to think about. The first is, well, what's going to be the impact of any discount that I might give? Secondly, what do my own local bid arrangements, business plan, bid proposal say? And if I were even thinking about doing it, or my board was thinking about doing it, can I? The third is, what are your own variation provisions that might allow you to vary from the principle you set down, which is everybody's in it together, paying the same levy, maybe with some marginal discounts or exemptions for, let's say, those in shopping centres. What gives you the ability to vary from that? If you don't have a variation provision, then the answer is you simply can't. Number four, do you need to hold an alteration ballot? And I think the answer is you probably would if what you were actually going to do was give discretionary amounts. You'd need to get everybody to concede to that. So there is a huge job in terms of an alteration ballot, and I'll move on to that in a moment. The fifth is, what is your billing period? Are you talking about people asking for a discount on what's already been raised or what is yet to come? And if it is what is yet to come, i.e. you are about to bill for your next year, you're not a March or April start date, then you may as well get your principles in place now and make it clear to levy payers that there is no discount available with the bill. Then you need to look at who's paid and wants to pay, because for every person saying, I want a reduction, you may have another saying, no, 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 I want the bid to be fully funded and they're ready to act for me throughout this difficult period. So you may appease one but irritate another. The next point I think is very important from your board's perspective, which is that if you have a director on your board from an organisation asking for a discount, then they could find themselves in a conflicted position, because under the Companies Act 2006, they have to act in the best interests of the company, the bid company, of which they are a director. What they're not then able to do is to use their own position to influence the position of the company. So they may have to abstain from any discussions relating to this, particularly if they're one of those high street retailers that are written in. The next thing to consider is the industry bodies collectively, and they didn't need to do this, have considered the requests and have come to a decision, which is no levy, no reduction or exemption from levy should be given in the current circumstances. There's no justification for it. That letter is available for you to download from the British Bids website, but we've also added a template letter that you might want to send in response to those requests. So this is your letter giving your own explanation as to why you may not want to give a discount, and then you attach the industry letter as your further evidence for that decision. Now that template letter is available as a Word document. You can therefore add into it. We've been doing all of these wonderful things during the last 3 months, and actually our costs have not adjusted. Therefore, we need you to pay the full levy. So there is a sort of standard response there. And our view is that if all of these responses where the local decision is to not agree a reduction are met with exactly the same response, then actually the retailers involved will begin to understand this is the sort of the view of the industry. So the more we can standardize the response, the stronger that response is. And then the final thing is to remember that the debt is not yours. The debt is owed to the local authority, your local billing authority. They therefore make the decision, and they have no power under the regulations to offer discretionary or indeed across the board discounts. They don't have the power to do that. So if the local authority's view is, no, the amount must be paid in full and we're prepared to enforce against that, then actually that is the direction you would follow anyway, because you can't just write bits of your levy off. It's their debt and it's passed to you under the operating agreement. So some frequently asked questions, and then I'll come off this, and Emily, you can tell me whether anybody else has got some. So one bid asked, if we decide to go for an alteration ballot, so I don't know which bid it is because I've asked to not be told the bids here, but if you've decided to go for an alteration ballot, my recommendation to you would be to think that through again and make it absolutely sure that's what you want, because alteration ballots create even more uncertainty. They're there to try and tidy up an irregularity. They were never intended for this kind of circumstance. And actually what you're then doing effectively is holding a ballot mid-term, and businesses will get confused as to why you're doing that. So make sure you are absolutely intent that you're going to use an alteration ballot. But if you do use an alteration ballot to enable a levy reduction, how soon could we hold the ballot? Well, the answer is the ballot is held in exactly the same way as a bid ballot, and therefore you have to give the normal notices. So it's not a quick thing. You can't hold it next Monday morning. You have to produce a business plan, still do a set of justifications to the local authority. They have to get themselves up and ready for the ballot. You have to notify the Secretary of State. They have to run the ballot. You have to run it for 28 days. You have to get an answer. So by the time you've done this, you're going to be certainly closer to Christmas than you are to the end of summer. But I would think through whether you actually really want to go for an alteration ballot. The other thing with an alteration ballot is if you've altered to reduce, you then have to somehow justify why you will alter to go back to the originating rate. And that bit I think is going to be harder still. So has government legislated that even if we wanted to hold an alteration ballot, let's say, I don't know why we've got alternation ballots in there, but anyway, has government legislated that no ballots can be held until 2021? No, that's a myth. They haven't. The Coronavirus Act gave bids whose terms expire between the Coronavirus Act in March and December 31st, 3 further months. So many of those have delayed their ballots until Q1 2021, but there is nothing to stop you holding a ballot in 2020. It's just that that particular group of bids have been given longer to deal with their renewals. So no, you could hold it now. What are the offers of discount being made? Well, I've told you about that. And when doing so, does it set a dangerous precedent for bids? Well, yes, I think the answer it does. The more the levy payers can say, I've got another one that's given me a discount, the harder it becomes for others perhaps to resist it. So the industry needs to understand the position that it's at now, and therefore it is helpful to have these kind of sessions with lots of bids in them where you can take not just your own view, but hear the wider views of the industry. Yes, there is a dangerous precedent that's been set. The more that give discounts, the more dangerous it will be. And then, as I say, the harder it will be to go back to the originating rate. Which major levy payers have requested discounts? Well, what we're finding is that the same levy payers are not making the same requests of each bid. So the sort of names that are coming out here, the Primarks of this world, Lush have asked for it, H&M have asked for it, and various others. They're not necessarily all asking every single bid. So some are asking, some are asking, let's say, Manchester bid, and others are asking Ipswich bid. But clearly what you know is, if you were to do a deal with, let's use Primark as an example, you know that the others will know about it very quickly and come and ask for that same discount. So you can't do neat, quiet little deals here. That's not permitted, and it wouldn't be recommended. Can we offer a discount? Well, I've given you the answer to that. I don't think you can on a discretionary basis. You could, but I think you may get challenged, and if you get challenged, it might unravel before you. So actually, any discounts probably need to be collective and across the board. What support are we offering in response to the discount request? Well, we're here doing this session. We're available 24/7 to you, but I've referred you to the website where the 2 letters are available for for download. The first is the agreement signed by the 3 organisations, all saying no discounts available. And then there is the template letter that makes it easy for you to respond should you do so. The other thing is, should you be responding, should the council be responding, the more you can get your local authority to deal with this, the better. Should we still send our bills out? So this must be from a bid whose year is, let's say, starting, I don't know, September the 1st. And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. The businesses have to have those bills ahead of your new start of year. So the answer to that is categorically yes, you must. If you choose not to, the only effect it will have, you won't appease anybody, you will just get less collected at the end, because the longer you take to bill people, the more that might run out of road financially and therefore won't pay you. So there's just no justification for not sending them out. What happens if major levy payers don't accept the decline of the request? Well, the answer is they will, the levy itself will be enforced by your local authority at some point, and that enforcement action is absolutely identical with business rates, and therefore it will go to a court, and the court would either instruct that the bill is paid, or alternatively you would be given, or the local authority would be given, the right to seize goods, fixtures, fittings, assets to the value of that bill, which would then be liquidated and you would be paid. We all hope that we don't end up in that position, but the reality is that the local authority eventually has got to be instructed, are you telling me to give the discount, or are you telling me to enforce? It's one or the other. It won't just sit there as a debt owed. So, Emily, I'm finished in the half an hour. Are there any questions that people want to put to me?
I haven't got any questions on the chat, but we've retained everybody on it. So hopefully everybody's taken away a lot of information from the session. Does anybody want to come off mute and ask a question? You can feel free to do so. Just raise your hand on the chat, maybe.
Hi. Chris
Hi,
Barnard
Chris.
here. Can I just ask a quick question regarding the information that's being recorded? I had a discussion with Karen from Epsom on this very subject, and the fact that their board are resisting the willingness to chase and enforce, and also to send out their bills and maybe consider discounting. But are we okay, if she's not on this call, is it okay to take that recording and send that to her directly?
Yeah, sure. We're going to make the recording available today, so you won't have to send it to her. It'll be available for anybody to access. You'll be
excellent. Okay, I just need to make sure that I can point her in the right direction, that's all, because I think she needs to see this.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I've just had something come through the chat. So I agree with being fair and consistent. I guess many bid managers are slightly concerned about this generating an increase in future no votes to ballot. Do we estimate how this may unravel?
Well, that's an entirely speculative question, isn't it? I mean, probably if you had a ballot next month, you'd be more mindful of it than if you had a ballot in 2 years' time. But the reality is the requests, by and large, are entirely consistent in that the businesses are not saying they are against bids in any way, shape or form. In fact, most of the letters and correspondence make it very clear they're very pro-bid. They are asking for a discount only dealing primarily with that 3-month period. So it's an historic and one-off fixed period. There's no inclinations that if the ABC bid were to refuse a discount and the XYZ bid were to agree a discount, that XYZ would get a yes vote and ABC would get a no vote. I don't think there's any inclination of that. What one retailer is saying is that here is a request, and if you do not respond within 7 days, then we are going to assume you have agreed the request. Well, again, in law, that would be very, very difficult for them to justify that silence is acceptance. By way of a contract, both parties need to enter into that contract and agree. So you needn't be rushed into this, and you don't need to feel that you've got to do the right thing in a certain number of days. At the end of the day, the bill is owing until you decide with your local authority that it's not.
Thank you. Another question here. So our council have made the decision not to undertake any recovery action. Where do we stand in relation to the collection of the levy?
You stand in a position where you say to your local authority, you need to do what I'm asking you to do and what the regulations ask you to do, which is to proceed with enforcement, if that is your decision. So if the board's decision is, no, follow the regulations, carry on as you were, then the local authority has to respond to that. It has obligations under the regulations, which it can't vary from. Now, I have played both sides of the argument here. The justification for a local authority is likely to be, but we are not enforcing against our own debt. So, housing arrears, rent arrears. Also, we're not enforcing against historic business rates, even though they're offered this year business rates there. We're not even enforcing against council tax. Well, that's great. That's fine. That's their perfect decision. It doesn't mean they can do that and enforce that on you. If they were to say we're not enforcing, then I think the bid would be perfectly at liberty to say, well, then you've got to offer us some cash flow assistance. You can't have it always. We're going to run out of road here. Emily, you're on mute.
Sorry, we've just got about time for this last point is, and this is, I think, just maybe looking at it from another perspective is, perhaps it isn't unreasonable if bids have had furloughed staff, have received grants from government. Some bids have had small business rates relief grants, and we generally can't do events. So is that argument stronger than this one in terms of winning the battle?
So I think if I was the barrister for the retailer, I would certainly be using all of that. Yes, the bids have had assistance. This particular bid reduced its cost significantly. It even hibernated, Your Honour, during the 3 months, and therefore there is no justification for it. Okay? If I was the barrister for the bid, I would probably say, touche, you got furlough help, you got additional grant funding, you have been let off business rates, so actually the same still applies. I'm a very small business, I need cash in order to continue. You're telling me that I'm of value to you, and you're trying to set a precedent. So I think it depends which side of the fence you're on. It's a decent argument. I'm not entirely sure that in a court of law, if it were ever to come to that it would sustain itself.
Well, I'm mindful of the time, so we are obviously, as Paul said, we're always available to chat. So if you do want to send any follow-up things through to us, please do, and we'll pick them up and come back to you. I've made a note, a little crib sheet of some of this Q&A, so I'm happy to pull that together and put that out and add that onto the website so you can refer back to this. But as Paul said, we will make this recording available and you can download it and listen back to it. So thank you for joining, everyone. Paul, is there anything further you want to say?
No, I think that the most important thing is take the advice, use British Bids. We're here for you. All you have to do is pick the phone up or email us, and we will help you with your own specific circumstances. But the industry needs to take a united view on this, and therefore the collateral we're making available, which is the recording of this Q&A, the presentation that I've given you this morning, the letter from the industry, but also the tailored letter that you can use locally, and the justification for doing so, hopefully, is giving you a bit more steel about it.